There can rarely, if ever, be a zero-risk area in the world. But it's up to each of us to do our best to reduce risks to security and health wherever we intend to travel. It's the responsibility of companies and individuals to make sure that any form of travel to all destinations is as safe and secure as it can possibly be. In some places, though, there are obvious risks, and we should all take some general precautions before we leave, during the journey, and while we're there. This presentation gives some general guidelines on things to do and not to do. Depending on where you're going, specific items may or may not apply. But it makes sense to be prepared. IMCA's guidance on travel security provides good advice. Before you leave, you should get to know as much as you can about your destination. There are many ways of doing this. Ask friends or colleagues who've been there before. Check with your company and local contacts whether there are any special pieces of advice about it, and buy a guidebook. Check the company's website and/or intranet, and speak to your employing company. Also check any relevant government websites. Make sure that you establish contact points with your family and the office, including a 24-hour key contact, if possible. Find out whether you need to arrange to be met, and only reveal your travel arrangements to those who really need to know them. And check to see if your company has a tracking system for employees. Give yourself plenty of time before leaving to arrange the necessary documentation. Pay special attention to your passport. Look after it carefully. It should be valid not just for when you leave, but for the whole length of your stay, and some countries insist on it being valid for 6 months from the time you arrive. It's a good idea to take a photocopy of it, as well as some other forms of identification too. Keep them all separate from your passport. If you need a visa, check with travel agents or embassy websites in good time. It can take 3 or 4 months to issue some visas. Check that your company provides travel insurance which covers you for your route, as well as the area you're visiting and for what you'll be doing there. Take a copy of the policy with you and make a note of its emergency number. Don't forget medical insurance, which should cover evacuation for medical reasons, and insurance against the loss or theft of money or valuables. Make sure that any necessary ID cards for insurance are up to date. If you need an international driving permit, give yourself plenty of time to apply for it. Make a list of important contact and other emergency numbers. Program them into your mobile phone and keep the list somewhere safe. Also, list other important information such as your passport details and numbers of your ticket, credit cards and traveller's checks, and give a copy to your key contact. By key contact, we mean someone who'll be able to contact your family and the office on your behalf. Your company could appoint such a person, but especially if you're travelling alone, make sure you get the contact arranged before you leave. That way, you'll have a secure, regular means of communication with home if the unexpected happens. For some countries, it might be worth arranging emergency evacuation plans. This should already be part of established company procedures. It would help if you identified alternative routes or modes of transport right from the start. When you're deciding where to stay, try to get advice from well-known and trustworthy sources and make safety the priority, not cost. Your choice of luggage is important too. Take lockable suitcases and put your name and address inside. If you choose to put identifying marks on the outside, don't make them obvious things which give away personal information about yourself. Always try to keep one hand free when carrying luggage. Your continuing good health is important, and you should always try to have a full medical and dental checkup before you leave. If you need treatment of any sort, arrange to have it done before you go. And if you have any health problems, check with your doctor to see whether the place you're going to may affect them. If you're on medication of any sort, check whether it's legal to carry that medication in the countries you're visiting. A doctor's letter could be useful, and make sure you take enough with you to last the whole of the trip. You may need vaccinations. If so, find out which ones and have them done well before you leave. You may also need a vaccination certificate, and it makes sense to make a note of any important personal medical information, such as allergies. Whatever your destination is, if it involves a long flight, it's important to avoid the risk of deep vein thrombosis, or DVT. Statistics suggest that the risk is greater if you're overweight or taking contraceptive pills or hormone replacement therapy. Exercise your feet, legs and ankles regularly during the flight. Consider wearing compression stockings. Get up and walk around. Companies who identify personnel with frequent travel requirements should refer them to healthcare professionals for advice on appropriate vaccines and other useful information. Basic advice simply requires a common sense approach, such as washing your hands frequently with soap and water, avoiding unpasteurized dairy products, never eating undercooked meats, raw eggs or raw shellfish, and being sensible about where you buy food and where you eat. If you're visiting a country with a tropical or subtropical climate, there's always the risk of malaria. It's one of the most significant diseases in the world and affects some 300 million people every year. It develops from the bite of an infected female mosquito. Victims develop a fever and severe flu-like symptoms. There are two things you can do. First, stop the mosquitoes biting you. Keep any exposed skin covered, especially at night, and use insect repellents. Put screens over windows and doors and mosquito nets over beds. And second, take anti-malarial drugs and follow the instructions on the prescription exactly. Complete the whole course of drugs. That means the whole course. Don't stop just because you've returned home. Anyone who's been scratched or bitten by an animal can develop rabies, so try to avoid contact with animals. There is a vaccine, but it can have unpleasant side effects, so vaccination should only be considered if you're going to a high-risk area. If you are bitten, get help immediately. The sooner you're treated, the better your chances of recovery. Many other infectious diseases, such as cholera, hepatitis and typhoid, are caused by eating or drinking contaminated food or water. Make sure that what you eat has been thoroughly cooked and is still hot. Don't eat anything that's been sitting around for a long time. Don't buy food from street vendors, and avoid all uncooked food except fruit and vegetables that can be peeled. If you're not sure whether the water's safe, boil it. If you can't, use a disinfectant tablet or a good certified filter, or stick to bottled water, and not just for drinking, but for things like brushing your teeth. Don't add ice to your drink unless you're sure it's been made from treated water. And if you do fall ill when you're abroad, tell someone about it, even if it seems trivial. If it does get worse, you may not be in a position to get help. If you buy drugs locally, make sure you understand how to use them and what dose to take. It makes sense to take all the necessary precautions. If you need to carry a card showing any allergies or medications, check that you have it with you. A card showing your blood type could also be useful. Always bear in mind that when you're in a different country, you'll be subject to its laws, which may be very different from your own. Make sure that in the places you are going to, that you're allowed to carry the medication you need. Wear appropriate dress. In some countries, a military-style outfit could lead to problems. You could even be arrested for wearing it. Think about the impression you'll give in the country you're visiting. It's best to avoid flashy, expensive gear or outfits that make you look like a tourist. It's also best not to draw attention to yourself by wearing expensive watches or jewelry. Ask yourself what the local society would find appropriate. When you're talking with strangers, be polite, but careful. Avoid subjects like religion or politics. Don't tell them any personal details. In your dealings with other people, the most important thing is to respect the differences between your culture and theirs. Many situations arise or tensions are created through ignorance. Nowadays, there's no excuse for not finding out about local customs, laws, and the general culture of a country. You can check these things in guidebooks or on websites. It helps to learn some basics of the language, and you should have a phrasebook with you. Some things which may seem normal to you might be considered offensive, so be careful when you're discussing differences and don't criticize or complain about local habits. The way people dress, how they relate to one another, and their attitudes to alcohol and drugs may be very different from what you're used to. But you're in their country, so it's up to you to adapt. Even an apparently simple action like taking someone's photograph could cause offense. So it's respect and common sense. Enjoy the culture, appreciate it, and respect it. It makes sense to have access to different ways of paying, such as cash and payment cards, but make sure that you can in fact use credit and debit cards in the country you're visiting. Don't assume that the facilities you're used to will be available everywhere. Don't take lots of credit cards, and make sure you know the limits on each one. In some countries, you can be arrested for exceeding those limits. Never carry large amounts of cash. Just keep a small amount of the local currency in a front pocket or a money bag. It's a good idea to take 2 wallets or purses, so that if you were unlucky enough to be mugged, you could hand one of them over. This one should carry some US dollars, some local currency, and perhaps an old credit card to make it look authentic. Keep your main money and cards in the other one and hide it safely somewhere on your body. Never carry more money than you'll need for that particular day. Make sure you know or can find the emergency phone numbers in case credit cards get lost or stolen. Before you leave, get used to the look and the value of the currency you'll be using in the place you're visiting. Seeing people peering closely at coins and notes is a giveaway that they're a visitor and perhaps unsure of themselves. And if anything is stolen from you, get a copy of the police report for insurance purposes. When you get there, make sure you know the phone number of the nearest consulate and that you have your emergency contact card for the region you're visiting. If you're taking a mobile phone, make sure it works there. If not, buy a phone card for public call boxes. Make regular calls to check in with your key contact and your family. You should find out everything you can about the hotel and the area around it before you leave. Avoid staying on the ground floor. Always lock your door and use the safety chain. Before you open the door to anyone, use the spy hole, if there is one. If you're in any doubt at all, phone reception. Check your emergency exit route and try it out to make sure all the doors open and that you can get out easily. Count the number of doors to the fire exit. Remember that you may have to get out in the dark or through a smoke-filled corridor. Remember that if an area is filled with smoke, there's likely to be more breathable air at floor level. Identify the nearest fire alarm and extinguishers. Don't keep cash in your room. Put it in the hotel safe with any other important or valuable items. Be street safe and street wise. Read the IMCA guidance. It gives some useful tips. Remember, there are no-go areas. Stay away from them. Don't be tempted to go into badly lit side streets. Don't carry weapons. And as we said before, don't flaunt expensive items such as watches or jewelry. Keep your clothing simple. Don't carry a camera around your neck. And don't draw attention to yourself by talking loudly or acting in a way that might provoke a hostile reaction. If you've got a shoulder bag, wear it across your body, not just over one shoulder. And if possible, don't walk around alone, and always be aware of what's going on around you. Pickpockets are a menace in most countries. They operate mainly on public transport and in crowded places. They can work in pairs or even teams, and can be expert in distraction and quite sophisticated scams. Being mugged is also a possibility, and not just in places noted for crime rates. If you're unfortunate enough to be confronted by a mugger, don't resist them. Give them what they ask for. That's where the spare robber's wallet or purse could be useful. If you are robbed or have an accident, report it to the police and to your company as soon as possible. The police will give you a crime number, which you'll need for any insurance claim. Don't discuss professional topics in public areas, and be careful when using your laptop and phone. Your company's security may be strict, but it just needs one careless individual to mention or type some sensitive or confidential piece of information, and the damage is done. And by now, everyone should know that you should never agree to carrying anything out of the country for someone you don't know. When it comes to travelling around, there are other considerations. You should, of course, have an up-to-date driving licence and insurance papers. Driving is more or less dangerous according to where you are, so find out about relevant local driving laws, local habits, and attitudes to things such as giving way to other cars or overtaking. The ways in which local police apply the laws sometimes vary, so find out about them too. Make sure you know where it's safe to drive. Take a map and plan your route properly. If you're thinking of driving a vehicle after a long-haul flight, remember you may be tired. It might be safer to take sleeping time in a hotel before travelling onwards. If you're rested and alert, you'll drive more safely and be more aware of possible threats. If you're hiring a car, inspect it carefully. Check the tyres, brakes, oil and water, and try it out beforehand. Make sure it has enough fuel for your journey and that there are petrol stations where you're going. Even if you're only leaving the car for a few minutes, lock it. Keep the passenger doors locked while you're driving and don't leave valuables in it. Make sure it has emergency equipment such as a fire extinguisher, first aid kit, toolkit, spare bulbs, and warning triangle. If ever you find that you're not sure where you are, or you get involved in an accident that seems suspicious, don't get out. If you've any doubts about driving, or there's a risk of carjacking or kidnap in the area, it's best to hire a driver. You may also be able to take a taxi, depending on what the security directive is for that region. If you do, don't take any chances. Book it through your hotel or get advice from a local friend or colleague. Note the driver's name and ask what the fare will be before you get in. Make sure it's a licensed taxi with a meter and that the driver uses it. If there's another passenger already there, don't get in. Depending on the area travelled in, the risk of kidnap is generally low, but it can be a potential risk, and the IMCA guidance gives some useful advice on types of kidnap and the ways of minimising the risk. This may seem a lot to remember, but it's basically all common sense. Some simple precautions are all it needs to prevent your trip being spoiled. Take care. Return safely.